Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. On today's episode, we're going to discuss reintroduction to training, because that's what we're currently in the middle of. Now, let's kick it. So we're officially back from our Euro trip. So personally for me, it was 44 days, absolutely no strength training. I know it was a little bit less for you too, but I wanted to start off by talking about what we're personally doing for our reintroduction to strength training after our extended holiday. Alex?
I like to do more of an intuitive type of training where I just kind of do what I don't have a set program, so I just kind of do what I think is going to be good to get the rust off the joints and stuff. So I usually stay away from any primary exercises. I focus on dumbbells. I do remedial and assistance exercises, higher reps, just so that I can get the soreness kind of out of the way and then just get moving again, try to gain that range of motion I might have lost through the few weeks of not training. But it's really also just there's a big mental component too. So I just want to get back into it, have fun, work hard, but not work too hard.
Yeah, just feel good.
Just
getting
feel
back
good
into the gym.
Yeah.
Pauric?
So I have a slightly more structured approach than Alex. I know the first thing that detrains for me is my work capacity. So what I want to focus on is rebuilding my work capacity. So when I get back into the bigger plan, structured training, that I won't have massive drop-offs of weight or reps from set to set. So what I'm doing is higher reps. So anywhere from 12 to 20 reps, I'm doing A, B, and C series. A and B series are assistance-based compound exercise done antagonist superset fashion. Somewhat shorter rest periods, so 60 to 90 seconds is the general rule. And then I did an upper one and a lower one. So just one upper body session, one lower body session. So this allowed me to have 5 exposures to each session. The reason I did one upper and one lower is so I was getting more consistent feedback to where my strength and work capacity levels were without changing exercises and have to adjust for the different exercises. So 5 exposures to each, and then the way I set up the how I increased the output from session to session was session 1. I made sure I was well below, in sub-maximal range, a couple reps in reserve, probably 4 to 5 reps in reserve on all exercises, and just get all my reps in and maintain my rest periods. So building work capacity that way. Session 2, I probably got a little bit closer, probably 2 to 3 reps in reserve. And session 3 is when I started getting towards failure. Yeah. So I was allowing myself to fail on some sets. It still wasn't trying to hit failure across the board. It was maybe 1 set per exercise. And then session 4 and session 5, I just keep pushing the amount of times I let myself get towards failure. And this is just going to slowly keep increasing the demands of my work capacity to reproduce these efforts from set on set. So when I do get back into full structured training, that I'm in a better position to really push and get a true representation of where my strength and volume tolerance is from the very get-go.
Yeah. And you both are doing 4 days a week, because I know you got back, you were saying that it's a 2.5 week period just because you wanted to get back to training sooner than later.
So I started on a Thursday, but I'm just going to do a 2.5 week long phase. So I start up my bigger structure of a program on a Monday.
Yeah. And then you, Alex, kind of the same thing?
I had 4 different trainings. I had upper 1, upper 2, lower 1, lower 2. Oh, and we did conditioning too.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask, because I know you guys did conditioning last week, but it wasn't a normal setup that you normally do.
But it was pretty...
So we did it, so it was more... It wasn't technically an aerobic flush, but it was closer to that. So we did 30 minutes of somewhat continuous movement but with modified strongman type exercises. And we just did it for reps that all the exercises took roughly the same amount of time. So we could just constantly work around, working at a lower perceived exertion. So not trying to go all out. You're always trying to be able to, once you finish an exercise, you could go straight in and have a conversation. So more like zone 2 type work. And we then chose exercises going to hit a multitude of different movement patterns and planes that we don't really get exposed to. So there's more rotational work. There was like straight leg bar crawls just to really open up the hamstring and the posterior chain. So stuff like that there. So we're just working through lots of different movement patterns. So I always love that as a reintroduction in the training because you feel great after it.
Yeah.
Like everything just feels nice, loosey-goosey.
I've done that before with you, like when we first reintroduced conditioning. But it's really cool. Like at first I was like, well, this is kind of weird. Like you're used to, when we do conditioning, we're so used to going all out. But this is like, it was definitely a good way to get back into it.
Yeah, you just have to be somewhat smart about the way you choose your exercise. Like some exercises aren't going to suit it. Like you can't do a sub-maximal prowler sprint.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. You can, but you could do like a sub-maximal heavy prowler walk or like tank, like forward sled drag. Like you can do all these things. It's just the all-out exercises don't really fit it too well.
Yeah. And Steph, what are you doing for your reintroduction to training?
So for me, I've been training for 36 years, and it's not my first rodeo at extended periods of off times. In my teens and my 20s, I was very steady. I would never miss. But, like moving to the U.S., transitioning jobs, building gyms, blah, blah, blah. So I've had phases where I've gone a decent amount of time without training. So it's nothing new to me, but this time I'm basically reintroducing within reintroduction because last August, September, when I tore my tricep, basically the last macro of the year, I didn't train at all. I couldn't train. So from September till January 1st, I didn't train. So January was straight up like rehab. Then the second macro of the year was PAB. And then the third macro, so block 5, was actual real training. And this is what I did before the Euro trip. So it was not a full block. It was 5 weeks actually. So 5 weeks training. So that to me was a introduction. Like macro 1 and 2 were transitional, and then macro 3 was my introduction to training, and then I had basically more time off than I had reintroducing. So now I'm back at reintroducing. But to me, like I'm starting right away on macro for accumulation 7, but because I haven't done anything for 6 weeks, except walking, that doesn't really count. I haven't, we'd eat 1 or 2 meals a day of whatever, had drinks. So of course, right now I lost muscle mass, gained body fat, most likely relatively inflamed. Sleep felt good, but it obviously was disturbed, right? So I understand going into accumulation 7 that my work capacity isn't there. My tolerance to load won't be there. So I'm following the plan in terms of the periodization model. My meso is at 78% intensity, which is 8 reps, but I'm on slightly lower volume than I would usually do to make sure that I don't dig my recovery curve too low. And my step loading is wider than normal because I need to gauge what load I'm using. But I'm pretty quick with this. We're talking about maybe week 1 or 2, I'll use a wider range for step loading just to get accustomed to ranges of motion. But by week 3, I should be fine and back to training, with typical RM load with a 10 to 12% step loading range, training to failure in the B series, and on and on. But it's like yesterday on upper body 1, I had one set that was taken to failure, and that wasn't even planned. It's just I reached a true RM load sooner than I thought. But that's it. But then in terms of program design, then you have to be careful about certain things. So the reason why I bring up the inflammation, the work capacity, load tolerance, is you need to account for this in your exercise selection. So, for example, my lower body sessions, I have a heels elevated safety squat bar on lower body 1. I'm able to have a relatively long range of motion on this. So we know that long range of motions tend to create more fatigue. So because of this, my second lower body session, instead of doing a conventional deadlift, which at this point might compound fatigue too much combined with the long range squat. And to me, I will always prioritize long range squat in the introduction to training. There's just more bang for your buck on a mobility perspective with squat compared to deadlift. So what I'm doing is, instead of doing a conventional deadlift, I'm doing a Romanian deadlift. So there's still some range of motion, but it's a little shorter. It's a little less demanding for full flexion in the bottom and the spine in the bottom starting from the ground. So that's how I'm like mitigating my reintroduction to training. So again, I'm following the periodization plan, but I'm tweaking exercise selection. Another example, lower body 1. I'm doing unilateral lying leg curl, and lower body 2, I'm doing standing leg curl. So I'm making sure both my knee flexion are unilateral to make sure that I correct any imbalances that might have happened during my 6 weeks of non-training. I'm picking leg curl variation that are in a shortened position instead of a lengthened position, so affecting fatigue and recovery even less. So a little less trauma to the fiber, a little less muscle damage, which wouldn't be a great thing when you're inflamed. So as I reintroduced proper nutrition yesterday, I know that this will improve in the short term. So it wouldn't be as much of an issue for intensification 7. So it's the same thing across the board. Like I really paid attention to not planning a lot of extreme ranges of motion. Like I have step ups. I do have split squats, but only once. So stuff like that, just to make it a little easier to recover. And then I'm slowly reintroducing the loads through a longer step loading. And again, it's just a little less volume. Like typically I would have done 5x8, but I'm doing 4x8. But it's 4x8 with like I said, a slower progression. So that's how I'm dealing with my reintroduction. But I need to make sure that it's real standard training, because I also need to, after this 6 weeks of non-training, I want to be motivated by my training as I'm getting back into it. So I didn't want to start with a bunch of isolation, high reps, slow tempo work, because I needed to feel excited about getting back into the gym. And for me, like multi-joint compound movements are what I love about training. So that's an important aspect also. There's a physiological component, but psychological aspects are also important in your longevity in training.
Yeah, and I think the whole psychological is you heavily rely on the intuitive side of training, and that's heavily more
psychological.
Yeah, psychological.
What I like to do.
And just feeling motivated, because you're going to, I know we had it in a discussion, we all know we're going to get back to training. So we will return to it. So it's just getting started. So for you just wanted to ease back into getting into the gym. Exactly. So with exercise selection for you, it's just choosing what you like, basically.
Exactly.
Pauric, was there anything specific? I know you were focusing more on building up your work capacity, but was there anything, like he mentioned, some of the exercise selections in the program, was there exercises you specifically put into your reintroduction to training?
Yeah. So the big thing was I wanted 4 compound exercises. So that it's for several reasons. So I wanted to have good economy of training. So I want to hit as many muscle groups as possible with as little exercise as possible. So I'm not doing one set of 16 different exercises. So I wanted to be very economical with that setup. And then in the upper body session, for example, I'm starting with a dumbbell incline press for no particular reason outside of the incline press is one that always is an issue for me strength ratio wise. It'll always drop off quick. So times I can introduce it just for these sort of phases to keep the volume there is always helpful. But I also knew I wanted to do dips, but I wanted to do dips for a high volume and not have to add weight. Yeah. So being able to put the dip in the B series made it way easier to not have to add load. So I wanted to do dips because I wanted to challenge my shoulder through shoulder extension.
And then did I hear you say yesterday, even with the dips, then you added a pause?
So instead of adding load, I added the pause in the bottom position because bodyweight dips are quite easy sometimes. So
yeah, sometimes.
When you add hundreds of pounds. Right?
So instead of adding weight, I added pause because the main thing I wanted out of it was to like work through a decent range of motion shoulder extension and like really get a lot of range of motion through the chest. So between the incline press and the dip, my chest, my anterior delta, my tricep are getting a lot of work. Then I did a lean 45 pull down and a row. So between that, my upper back, my lats, my biceps are getting decent amount of work. And then for my isolation exercise, to account for that, since my arms were already getting a sufficient level of work through the compound exercise, I added in a ladder raise because the side delts just more contribute as a stabilizer than a prime mover in any of those movements. So, all right, let's target something that hasn't got an awful lot of attention. And then it's a very similar thought process for the lower body session in terms of I wanted to do a hinge, I wanted to do a squat pattern, I wanted to work a knee flexion. Like I just went through movement patterns I wanted to make sure I hit, and then with an isolation exercise I did calves because calves hadn't been really targeted in any of those big movement patterns. So it was just more of a process of elimination to make sure it's a well-rounded program.
Yeah, I haven't seen you do the lower yet. What squat did you choose to do?
Single leg squat.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
So single leg squat, contralaterally loaded with a pause in the bottom.
Okay.
So again, contralateral loading is going to have a bigger impact on your abdominal recruitment because you're going to want to twist, so you're going to have a good abdominal recruitment. It's going to have good glutes, quads, and it's also going to reduce the amount of load you can use because there's now a stability component. So that was one of the reasons I chose that over a bilateral version or bilaterally loaded version. It's not a bilateral movement. And then pause at the bottom again, reintroduce those lengthened positions, but do it in a way that's going to reduce the load again, because obviously once you're pausing in the bottom, you're dissipating elastic energy and you're not going to be able to lift as much if you're just doing standard reps. So that was that choice. And then for the hinge pattern, I did an incline back extension to not overload the lengthened position too often. Yep. So while I get to work through a lengthened position in the incline back extension, just the way the gravity acts in the body, there's not that much overload when you're in that lengthened position, so you're still getting the stretch component without getting too much muscle damage, and it's a really good way to isolate the hip extensors.
Cool. So I know personally for me, I just wanted to get back right to training, so I told Steph I want to start whatever he had in mind for my programming, which I knew for the rest of the year I wanted to focus on hypertrophy. And I know though one thing when we briefly discussed yesterday, which you kind of mentioned in your own programming that you did with me, is you only program for the first week 3 sets, just so I didn't have as much for when I returned to training. But there are a few other things you kept in mind when you prepared my program.
Yeah, I mean, for you, it was way more thought behind the programming, simply because so you want to focus on hypertrophy for the last macro of the year. And I also know that you tend to work really, really hard. So you take your sets to failure and on and on. So I needed to make sure that I would find a way to mitigate your ability to recover through volume, exercise selection, and exercise variation, and load pattern variation. So because of that, I decided to go with weekly undulating periodization so that your sets and reps change from week to week. So it, forces you to go through different types of load. So this way you're not repeating the same stressor over and over and over again to create even more dip in the recovery curve. And then I'm using an integrated block structure, which is a 14-day microcycle, so that for 2 weeks, your exercises are different. So you're targeting different motor unit pulls. So you make it easy, it makes it easier to recover, but at the same time, it's good for hypertrophy perspective because now you're subjecting more different muscles to a training stimulus. So it's good in that sense. And so what I did is you already planned your first block. So you have 6 weeks planned already. But week 1 and 2, you're doing like moderate to low volume. Week 3 and 4, I added 1 set to your primary movements. And then week 5 and 6, I added another set. So that puts you more like at the end of the day, by the time your block is done, your average volume will be more like moderate, medium. But we did it in a way that's more progressive. So this way you can still train hard like you always do, but the fatigue created in week 1 and 2 won't be as dramatic. So that's kind of how yours is built.
Yeah, I'm excited to get back to training. I know we kind of all spoke about it, whether we missed it or not. I wanted the break, started off happy to have a break. The only activity we really did on the vacation was, on average, you and I did like 25,000 steps a day. We just walked and walked and walked. But I was happy to get back to it. You are kind of always have the same mindset where training is just something you do. You don't show much excitement for it or not for it. Alex, I'm
always good for it. I like to whine about it, I think, but that makes me feel better. But it was good to have like the 3-4 weeks off for me for sure. Just to give a rest to all the joints, get some more steps in. That's definitely something I want to. I won't be able to maintain 20,000 steps a day.
No. Yeah, but it's funny because everyone always tells us all the time that we walk so much more.
Yeah, but it's so different when you're on vacation. But like even when I've been back, I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to maintain at least my average. My average, like on my steps was like went up pretty high, but then it's just harder too, like where you're just like walking around aimlessly trying to get your steps in. But anyways, definitely want to keep my steps up. But I'm happy to start lifting weights again.
Yeah. And then Pauric, you were happy for the break for the first time in so long. Wish you've never really ever taken a break just because you've been training so hard.
Yeah, so
for so long.
At this stage, this is the longest break I've had in 20 years, which is a ridiculous statement for me to make, but it's true, between football and then just training for training's sake. So it's the first time I think I trained myself to the point of needing just to walk away and
at least you're now getting back to it. It wasn't one of those things when you were like, you know what, I'm never going to train again, because it goes back to the Gen Pop people we work with as coaches. If they take a break that long, it is a little bit harder to get them back into the gym. So in regards to what you do, Alex, I know you've had a lot of clients like this in the past where they take the summer holidays, they take extended holidays in the winter. What do you I know you have different approaches depending on the scenario, but if you want to go over some of them.
Sometimes what I do, and frequently, especially maybe more with the women, I would start them off with the program that they finished. So it's just getting them back into the gym, getting them back into like lifting again, but at least like mentally they don't have to learn a new exercise. So I know the weights that they were using. I can back off from those weights. So it's not a total guessing game where they have a whole new stimulus and I have to figure out what's happening, because I mean, 6 weeks for like a really true Gen Pop person is like a long time. So they've lost a lot of those abilities. So at least if I start from somewhere that I know that they've been able to do, I can back off. But then if the person has a little bigger, stronger strength base, then I can still do the reintroduction phase where it's more like a regular program, but then I just back off on like the volume and then build up on that. So it depends on the people.
Pauric, anything you look out for? Did you have a lot of clients that you dealt with this?
Not as many as American clients would.
Yeah.
Like mine were, generally people would disappear for a little in the summer, but not as long. So when I did, the big things I wanted to do was reestablish range of motion and be careful when doing it to not overemphasize the length and position too much, because it's going to create even more soreness. They're already going to be sore. Don't want to double down on that. So pick and choose the movement patterns that you find it's going to be the most beneficial to create that range of motion. So say for lower body, the squat's going to be a real bang for your buck way of reintroducing the range of motion. So like pick the squatting variation, they can get as much range of motion as possible. That's going to be their main stretcher for the day. Instead of maybe doubling down on that with a split squat, you maybe choose a step up variation as their assistance. Like, so you play around and then slowly reintroduce till they get back to normal training, just to not create too much soreness. Like same thing for posterior chain. Like if they're deadlifting, great, they can deadlift, but I probably wouldn't have see the good morning in the same program for the first introduction phase. So just things like that. And then load management, make sure you don't want them to be going to failure on week one. Definitely not. Like they can train 5 reps shy of failure and they'll still come in the next day and be sore. So you just don't want to overly stress them to the point that you're going to break this habit that they're trying to reintroduce. The more important that they show up every day.
Yeah. Steph, in terms of reintroducing clients to training, if you have clients that have a higher training age and a higher level of strength compared to people that just they haven't trained for that long consistently, are there certain things you look out for those more advanced lifters after an extended break and their reintroduction to training?
Yeah, so if it's somebody advanced that's really strong, when I reintroduce training, I like to program like a PAB block, so that we're reintroducing movement pattern through full range, but we're using methods and modalities that does not allow you to use a lot of load. So you're rehearsing a pattern, you're creating functional range through the movement, but with lighter load. So the stress and the damage from this is not as great. So it really allows the trainee to basically groove and prime their motor patterns, so that once we move on to a traditional strength block, then they're ready to go all out and perform their fullest. But like I said, I'll still, like Pauric says, I'll still reintroduce compound bilateral multi-joint movements, but I'll use modalities that prevents me from really loading it. Now, with an athlete, then it depends, right? Because with the athlete, sometimes it's not necessarily reintroduction to training. It's a transition phase after the season. So if it's an athlete that trained all the way through the playoffs, takes a week or two off, and then starts training before going hardcore in the off season, then the transition phase is basically just to prepare them for the rigors of strength training at 4 times a week with heavy loads. So now they're moving from twice a week in-season training to now maybe 3 or 4 times a week. But we're going to focus on unilateral, single joint for the most part, muscles or range of motions in which they're not used to training because of the sport. So just to prepare the tissue for the heavy loading and the big movements that's coming. So this is more of a transition phase. Now, if I had an athlete that comes from 2 months of no training because they got injured, or their team did not make the playoff and they decided to go on an extended holiday and then they're coming back, then I'll deal with this more either like if they have a real big strength background, I'll just plan a PAB. Or because sometimes athletes, they're not always advanced in the weight room. Like, for example, let's say it's a hockey player, a baseball player, then it might just be a regular standard introductory phase type of program that has low intensity, a mix of bilateral, unilateral, and it's just a question of managing load better and making sure that we're progressive in dispatching training volume and load so that they don't reach failure week one, and then as we're progressing through the phase, then we're getting closer and closer and closer to their RMs. That's usually how I'll do it with that clientele.
I do think it's something people, I know we just recently saw it in a forum with a question you answered, is people confuse the terminology of transition phases and reintroduction phases. And I think it's just almost, are you going to say something?
Well, and active recovery weeks, because I think that's where the confusion
phase.
That's where I think the confusion was. They thought an active recovery week was a transition phase, which it's not.
Yeah, you're transitioning, but it's not like the purpose of what we use transition phases for. And then I know you always like to say the thing with reintroduction phases for someone who really doesn't have that much background in training. It's basically not a reintroduction. It's the same way you would treat an introduction to training for a new client.
Yeah. And then just like Alex was saying though, like with true Gen Pop, like I've trained Gen Pop in my career, but unlike Alex, most of my Gen Pop, they were like type A business type people. They would rarely miss more than a week or 10 days. So with that clientele, I just keep going. Keep going. Like wherever we finish, we keep going. We keep going all the time. So I haven't dealt a lot with the super long extended, but with that clientele, let's say it's 2-3 months. Like you start over with just regular programming, and there's nothing magical about it. It's not like this strong, big squatter that you need to be careful to not overload him out of nowhere, you know?
Yeah, like the untrained or barely trained people are the easy people to reintroduce because, like, say if someone has trained for 6 months and then took 4 months off, you can consider them that they've never trained. They may have heard a few words that's associated with training, but they have
probably forgot them.
They have lost all the abilities and motor unit recruitment ability. Like that's all gone. Yeah. You're starting from scratch. Whereas someone who is a big squatter and has a very efficient nervous system, but has took time off, now their nervous system's way stronger than what their tissue tolerance is. So you have to be way more careful with that process. And do what Steph was saying, like a pad block would be a great way to reintroduce that.
Because even like myself, as an example, in the past, so you know when we moved to California and we're building the gym, so we didn't have our equipment and we're training at Equinox, you know. I mean, the training, it was just doing leg press basically.
Yeah, that's where the leg press started.
That started way before, but that's all I couldn't really do. But then when the gym was ready and then I started training for real, basically it was a phase one, but I didn't do anything special about it. And then, I mean, 3-4 weeks later, my deadlift was basically back where it was prior to the move, right? But the reason is because I've been training for so long that it's not like I lost all of that motor unit recruitment ability.
I know that was like my post I made. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's muscle memory, like people like to say.
Yeah.
The post I made yesterday, and I've been training now for 13 years with a structured program. But it wasn't until more recently that I really never missed a session. And I'm saying like not missed a session. Even like last year, I was so anal about it in terms of like if I got it in on the weekend, I'd get it in on the weekend. But I really started never missing. And I think that made a huge difference in what I'm feeling now getting back to the training after such a long break. Because in the past, when I wasn't as consistent, it would be that I would take, say, even like 10 days off of training. So we'd go on a 2-week holiday around Christmas. Getting back to it, just where my physique would be, where my strength levels would be, everything was far less than what it feels like I'm at now. So it's just, I think people really, really underestimate the power of true consistent weight training, proper periodization, good program design, and how far that takes you in terms of long-term progress.
Years under your belt.
Years. Yeah. Okay, I know. So we talked about our reintroduction to training after our long holiday. So I know we kind of briefly talked about it, but I just want to kind of discuss what our personal plans are to wrap up the rest of the year. I know you, Alex, are switching it up a little bit.
In this transition phase in my life, you know, with perimenopause.
How old are you, Alex?
Perimenopause, I'm 50.
She says it now.
It's been hard.
I've been trying to get her to say it for years.
So in this transition in my life, I feel like I need to start transitioning the way I train. I feel like my recovery is not the same. I'm definitely more achy. I don't, whatever. Like I can maintain my strength pretty much, but the weights do feel heavier. Like when I pick up, I'm like, is this heavier? Maybe I'm using kilos instead. So in terms of my training, I haven't figured it out yet, but I definitely want to maybe shorten my weight training. I don't want to lose the habit of training 4 times a week. So maybe just, 30, 40 minute mark. And then start to introduce more like agility stuff, maybe more, even if it's more conditioning, like for 10, 15 minutes, more mobility. I just want to be a little bit more well-rounded in terms of my latter 50 years of life.
And I think for you too, like you have a solid background of training, but I know we've talked about it on different podcast episodes, some of the ridiculous things you've done in your training career. And you do have certain things that have been with you your whole life in terms of like aches and pains that now just as you age, it's just you have to kind of handle it more
smart.
Yeah.
I have to be more smart about my training. But I mean, I think I have enough decades of training that because I still want to prioritize and maintain my muscle mass as I get older, but I think I'll be able to do that with like maybe a little more different programming.
The thing with you is not only have you been strength training for a long time, your prior background was gymnastics. So like your nervous system, your base of strength and mass is already so high.
You're not muscular.
That for you to reduce the time dedicated to it, you're like, all you need to do at this point is maintain it.
Yeah.
So at least that's why you'll be able to focus on other aspects.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start like sprinting again.
Yeah.
Look at everybody's face.
We'll see.
I mean, you're definitely going to have to. We're going to take this slow.
That's the hard part. That's definitely the hard part because then I just start to, I'm going to do sprints. I'm going to do
Well, even when you did our plyo warm-up with us.
And then my knees ached for 3 weeks.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that you need to be very smart with how you start to incorporate it. And that will be not a reintroduction, not a transition. No, that's a straight up introduction for you to those things. You might have done it, but it's been a long time since you've done those things.
I always say it in the sports seminar. The most dangerous thing to do in terms of injury is for anyone who hasn't done any type of fast action in forever, that all they've been doing is control strength training, and out of the blue they decide they want to do high velocity, high force stuff like sprinting, you better take it slow and easy because this is a surefire way to tear muscles, pull muscles.
Yeah.
Yeah, like low capacity for muscle is very different when it's a slow eccentric versus a fast eccentric. So people don't realize the ground forces that sprinting's going to actually put on those hammies. So watch yourself.
The landings.
When you're ready for it, Alex, we can race.
We'll do it backwards. We'll run backwards.
Do it in the swimming pool.
Oh, there you go. Whoa. Another 20 years before I integrate into the twin.
And then Pauric, the rest of your year?
Is I'm going to move more into hypertrophy block, because pretty much for the last 2 years it's been relative strength and power, like as an overarching view. So I need to back off intensity a little, add a little more muscle back on, because I've maintained it pretty well. I've only probably dropped about 2 pounds of skeletal muscle mass in the in-body for 2 years of not really touching hypertrophy. So I'll move back in, put that muscle back on, give the joints a break.
I'm curious to see you back on a hypertrophy phase. I feel like it's one of those things that you don't necessarily love.
Oh, it's not going to be like hypertrophy. It's going to be nice.
It's like strength.
It's going to be strength. Just with a little more bias towards hypertrophy.
So a few years ago we had small Pauric, and now we have big Pauric. So maybe big Pauric now is going to become medium Pauric, and there's going to be another version of Pauric.
Like right now, I'd say I'm closer to medium Pauric, because I'm like 193 right now, and if I can get back up to like 200, that'd be good.
Yeah, because you were 200
for a year, for a couple of years, but like small Pauric was like 178, 180.
And Steph, you kind of already touched on it. You just want to be consistent with your training again.
I mean, me, it's I've always had the same goal, simply because I feel like I've never reached it. So
express your jackness.
yeah, I just want to be
jacked.
So I guess absolute strength / functional hypertrophy. I want to get stronger. I want to get more muscular. I want to be leaner. I want to
all the things. We want all the things.
I want to be a baller.
Shot caller. I know, obviously, we already said it. Hypertrophy is what it is for me, but I kind of give Steph mostly free reign when it comes to my programming. And I just told him hypertrophy, but you were good with me focusing on hypertrophy for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it made sense.
Yeah. And then I've never received a message from Steph in Train Heroic, and I've never messaged him in Train Heroic, so it was the first chat in the Train Heroic, and the message was just what you said earlier, and it was the Hypertrophy Weekly Undulating Periodization using an integrated block structure. That's the first and only message I've received. I think he just wanted me to, and then the only thing he said to me before, I don't remember if it was before or after the session, he was just like, pay attention to everything. Because
read all the words.
Yesterday was pretty straightforward.
Because from week to week, the sets will change, the tempos will change on certain things. So there's just a lot of
and then I have some
variation.
specialty techniques.
Yeah, so eccentric.
Yeah.
So week 2, 4, and 6, you have some sub-maximal eccentric methods.
It'll be fun. Okay. So that was our reintroduction back into podcasting after our extended holiday, even though we were with you every week because we did pre-record a bunch of episodes. It's been so long now, but I kind of want to think back to like being in Amsterdam when we got there and we hosted, how many students was it?
47?
48 students. It was an amazing one-day seminar. That was the comprehensive periodization seminar, and then as many of you know, for next year we have the comprehensive periodization and program design seminar. You can bundle those together, but it was one of those, like, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. It was one of those things where you just think how many people from all over came to a course, but specifically Belgium represented. So as we were still in Amsterdam before returning, what was it, a day after?
It was the next day.
We decided that in 2025, we are returning to Europe and we will be going to Antwerp because our Belgium students, we want to show you the respect you've been showing us in the last couple of years. So August 2nd,
It's something like that. It's very
Yeah,
close.
I think
August
it's
2nd.
August 2nd, 2025. We will be doing the comprehensive periodization and comprehensive program design seminar in Antwerp.
I mean, more than half of that Amsterdam class is
Yeah.
from Belgium.
And they travel here.
Yeah, we always have at least one, often two,
Yeah,
three.
that
in
don't know
course.
each other that
Yeah,
show
that
up to Florida.
Yeah.
So we will be going to Antwerp to host that course next summer. Don't forget that it is early bird registration now until November 30th. Technically, it ends on Cyber Monday, which I believe is December 2nd or something like that. So be sure to register on the early bird pricing. It is the only time we provide $500 off all of our education. And no, if you reach out to me after, you do not get the discount. Be sure to like, subscribe, register for next year's courses. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time, fam.